Righto, thank you. So as Garvin mentioned earlier, the resource regulators developed a learning from disasters module that all practising certificate holders have to complete within the 5-year time frame. So Mines Rescue don't own this course, but we are an approved training provider, so I just have to point that out at the start. So all this content is actually come from the mines regulator learning from disasters module. So the program focuses on lessons learned in the past to ensure that we develop a systematic approach to managing safety. So during the module in our course, we generate discussion. So we form groups and we analyse the learnings from numerous case studies, and then reflect back on our mine site of how we can take those learnings back. We also analyse the disasters using what we call the 10 Pathways to Death and Disaster, which was developed by Professor Michael Quinlan from the University of New South Wales. Now, I'll talk a bit more in detail about that in an oncoming slide. I've been fortunate to attend the International Mines Rescue Body Conference in Colombia earlier on in the year. There's still numerous disasters happening around the world. And we're fortunate in Australia that we're a much safer country than the rest of the world, but it's just some things happening around the world. Poland explosion in 2018, killing 20 people. They actually used sniffer dogs to try and find the bodies underground. So something a bit different. South Africa, they actually have different problems with people being kidnapped and dropped down gold mine shafts and being forced to mine gold. America still have plenty of ignitions of gas, which is very alarming, but they see that it doesn't cause an explosion, so it's not, but very alarming. And Colombia is just very primitive. I went underground in Colombia and they're basically hand mining, still hand mining, shoveling into carts, no ventilation, very, very minimal ventilation, and just very primitive. So we're very lucky to be in Australia, and it's good that everyone here has the same, is here for the same reason. We want everyone to go home safe. I just want to acknowledge that I'm going to talk about some disasters that people may have been directly or indirectly involved with, and I will remind a bit in a couple of slides, but it could be distressing, and if anyone does need to leave the room, please do so. So New South Wales mining disasters. Now, it's a very busy slide, and you can have a quick read through it, but as you can see, late 1800s into early 1900s, we killed 293 people between 1886 and then 1923. So the main ones was the Bulli mine explosion, 1887, with 81 fatalities. The Mount Kembla mine explosion, 1902, with 96 fatalities, and the Bellbird colliery in 1923 with 21 fatalities. So it is a busy slide, but if you want to have a quick look, I'll leave it up there for a minute. More recently, the Gretley colliery inundation inrush with 4 fatalities in 1996. The North Parks mine air blast in 1999 with 4 fatalities. And more recently, Ozstar rib sidewall burst with 2 fatalities. So in the course, at the start of the module, we talk about 4 disasters, and starting back in the 1902 up to the 1996 inundation. And then we generate some discussion and get people's different point of views on what they think has changed from 1902 up until now. The first one we talk about is the Mount Kembla disaster in 1902, is 96 fatalities. So it was the worst post-settlement peacetime disaster in Australia up until the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires. It was caused from accumulation of gas in a GOF. They had a GOF fall. The gas passed over a naked flame, which ignited a methane explosion, which then propagated into a coal dust explosion. No one knew what caused the explosion back then. The mine manager post the incident said, absolutely no danger from gases at Mount Kembla mine. It was reported in the Sydney Morning Herald that it was the best ventilated mine in New South Wales. The Royal Commission concluded that it was an explosion from methane which propagated into coal dust, and that if safety lamps substituted flame lights, the explosion wouldn't have occurred. Flame lights still continue to be used for a long period of time after this. The next one we talk about is the Bellbird disaster in 1923. An explosion that killed 21 people. It was actually 20 people were killed from carbon monoxide poisoning from the explosion and the subsequent fire. But it was one mine manager called John Brown who went back in to try and rescue the missing miners. So he died, and the condition. So he passed away trying to save the missing miners. The mine was considered very poor working conditions. People smoked underground. Phones didn't work. There was a lack of hazard reporting and controls. They sealed the mine and they went back into the mine and used proto suits, which were sort of early breathing apparatus, and recovered the mine, and they used a series of airlocks, and they built 12 airlocks and worked their way in. So it was a bit of an outrage that these suits were available to do that, but not in an emergency sense. So this was a catalyst to the formation of the 1925 Mines Rescue Act. The next one we talk about is the Appin explosion in 1979. So the mine was developing K panel, which was a 3-heading development panel. They were changing over, they were doing a vent change, and they'd pushed out B heading, which was the far right-hand side heading. And they'd pushed it out to about 100 metres, and then they ventilated it on Braddis, and they were doing a vent change to change the vent circuit from 1 intake to 2 returns. So back then, that was up to the deputy to build an overcast, build stoppings, pull Braddis sheets down, start 2 fans, get the mine back on production. Braddis standards were poor at Appin. Machines were reported to always be driving through the Braddis, so you can see that this overdrive was slowly accumulating an explosive mixture of gas. The original thought behind what caused the explosion was safety lamps, but subsequent investigation found the auxiliary fan was found in reverse. So back then that was quite common from what I understand. And you have to reverse the phase and open the enclosure and close it and start it back up. Now they found the enclosure with 1 stud in there. So they concluded that that was the ignition source. It was an auxiliary fan, not in an explosion protected state, ignited the gas at the exhaust end of the fan, which then ignited through the flume line, propagated into a methane explosion in the B heading overdrive, which then propagated to a coal dust explosion. The explosion killed 3 people, and the other 11 were overcome by carbon monoxide poisoning. So recommendations. So even for that deputy that had to go and do all that vent work, they didn't even have a way to measure vent flow. It was just dropping dust. That was the way that you'd measure vent flow. So the recommendations was implement ventilation officers. This is from the Royal Commission. Deputies to use methanometers, not just the flame safety lamps, which back then they still weren't as reliable, and I know Appin did use both flame safe lamps and methanometers at that point. They recommended inspectors to be leaving records of their inspections, so there seemed to be a lack of regular oversight. The Minister wrote to the mine manager 8 days before the incident, "The quantities of methane give me considerable concern," but nothing was done. So multiple explosions in the 70s led to improved gas monitoring and gas trending. And also, the last one on that, there was no interlocking of face equipment in those days. So you could be, the way operating a miner is the fan would trip off, you just turn the miner off when you see the dust start to accumulate. So it was recommended that they go to interlocking. So maintaining control is the theme of today, and there was a safety system there, and it was obvious that production was put over safety. Tragically, these 4 men lost their lives at Gretley in 1996 with an inundation. A developing C heading in 5051 panel at Gretley, and there was a young Walls End colliery that was abandoned that was supposedly, we'll go back, that was more than 100 metres away on their mine plan. So how did they get it so wrong? So in 1892 they traced the young Walls End colliery, and there was two mine plans on the one plan in 2 colours. They redrew the plan and assumed that those 2 mine plans were actually 2 seams and 2 mines. But what it was actually 1 mine, and the mine was resurveyed, and the different colour was the resurveyed plan. So that put the mine 100 metres out from where it was. Although there was plenty of warning signs leading up to the disaster. One deputy wrote in his report, "There is water gathered at 7 cut through. We are not close to an old mine, are we?" So there was no risk assessment or verification of that barrier. So the learnings we had was, the adoption of risk management and principal hazard management plans in relation to managing inrush. It was assumed that the 50-metre barrier, as Clause 9 stated in the regs in those days, was enough for any sort of plan that wasn't accurate, and obviously it wasn't. So just a little bit on our history in mines rescue. So in 1923, we spoke about the Bellbird disaster that then was a catalyst for the implementation of the Mines Rescue Act, which was implemented on the 31st of December 1925. But there was lots of lobbying leading up to that, so it wasn't just the Bellbird disaster, because other states had mines rescue services, and also it was known that other countries overseas had mines rescue services. So in 1926, we had the first mines rescue station established in Abermain. Subsequently, we had stations in the same year in Wollongong, Newcastle and Lithgow. So in 1993, as you can see, as mines got safer, the need for having mines rescue brigades sitting there waiting, like other emergency services, we worked out that we could start using these people to work as training, use their expertise in training. Then we established Mines Rescue as a registered training organisation, and we developed new courses such as the Coal Mines Qualifications Board Emergency Preparedness course, which all mine managers and under managers have to complete to be able to sit their written exam. We also developed working at heights courses. There was a number of fatalities in the surface operations at this point. 2002, Coal Services created under the Coal Industry Act 2001. That's where we joined the two entities of the Joint Coal Board and the New South Wales Mines Rescue Board under Coal Services. In 2004, we released our first virtual reality simulator, which opened in Newcastle. In 2019, we're using new technology using virtual reality free roam, where we can put anyone in just about any situation you can think of in the comfort of a training room. So I mentioned earlier about the 10 pathways to death and disaster. It's a bit of detail on where that's come from. So Professor Michael Quinlan, as I said, is from the University of New South Wales. He studied 24 disasters from 1975 to 2011. So he's researched across 5 countries with similar regulation to Australia. So it's USA, Britain, Canada and New Zealand and Australia. The research concluded there's 10 patterns that consistently recur in these incidents. And he said at least 3 of these pattern deficiencies always occur, or sometimes it's 5 or more. And he's also, research indicated that there's little to differentiate between a single fatality and multiple. You still go through the same patterns of failure. So what we do with these 10 patterns of failure in our Learning from Disasters module is we then go through case studies, and each case study's got a video, and then we get the groups to work through what they think the patterns of disaster have failed, the patterns which have failed, the pathways. And then we generate group discussion, and then we actually go through Professor Quinlan's findings, and it generates a good discussion in the room. So I'm going to go through the 8 disasters just briefly, and one in detail of the one that is part of the module. So just a reminder, if anyone is directly or indirectly involved, there's support services available. So the 8 case studies, the first one is Aberfan in United Kingdom in 1966. This is 144 fatalities. It was 116 children. It was a catastrophic failure of a colliery spoil tip or a stockpile. It was a build-up of water accumulate of rock and shale, and basically it was a slope stability failure, and it inundated a town and took out a school. So there's a video on that, and it's quite sad, but there's a lot of learnings out of that disaster. The other one's Gretley, which we've already spoken about today. The North Parks mine in 1999, so it was 4 fatalities from from the ore body above a block cave collapsed into a void, creating an air blast which travelled through the underground workings of a metalliferous mine with 4 fatalities. The next one we talk about is Pike River, and this is the case study I'm going to briefly go through today to show you the 10 pathways that failed at Pike River. Cadia East mine was as a near miss, so they were using a raise bore to drill a ventilation shaft, and they had an inrush, and it was a near miss to 7 people. There was someone in a bogger that was pushed 30 to 40 metres back while they were operating it with this inrush, so it was a very, very close call. The Ravensworth mine was a fatality if a light vehicle collided with a haul truck. The Cuttle Limestone Quarry was one fatality, which I'm sure some people here would be familiar with. So that was a resident of a neighbouring property to the electrical was found dead. The house was supplied with electricity from the quarry's electrical supply. The electrical supply was on and the crushing plant was operating. Excessive voltage appeared at the house, earth stake and water pipes. A phase to earth fault was identified on a motor supply cable. And the last one is Moolarben coal operations. Section of the high wall adjacent to a public road failed. No one was in the vicinity, but it was 40 metres from a public road. I'm sure some people would have seen the report on that one. So what we do, we pick 4 of these case studies and they go for 50 minutes. So depending on who the audience is, if it's underground coal, then we pick the ones related to underground coal. And if, metalliferous, you can see there's some metalliferous ones there, and also open cut. We picked the 4 that are relevant to open cut. The Aberfarn and Pike River are applicable to all courses as well. So the case study on Pike River. So in the course, we watch a video, and as I said, we go through the 10 patterns, and then I'm going to go through Michael Quinlan's 10 patterns and just provide some commentary on the disaster. So the first pattern, design, engineering and maintenance flaws. Decision to use hydro mining in the position of the main ventilation fan. So the design of the vent circuit was completely ineffective. They were supposed to drive a second egress out to the outcrop, which would have given them another intake, which would have made the vent circuit more efficient. They'd abandoned the second egress drivage and decided to hydro mine. They had minimal geological data to plan this mine with. They hit a sandstone graben that was unexpected, which put them away from the coal seam for quite a period of time. There was reports of a lot of non-flameproof and IS equipment. So back to that, maintaining electrical control. Number 2, failure to heed clear warning signs. They had so many incident reports leading up to this accident that my management said, there's just too many to do all this, and they basically just wiped them off and started clean. And they were all the incident reports being reported from underground people. It's terrible. There's only one gas monitor working at the time, underground. That had been flatlining at 2.96% methane for 2 weeks. That was in the return near the upcast shaft. Flaws in risk assessment. Failure to risk assess the hydro mining or underground main fan ventilation. There was reports of non-flame-proof equipment not far from that main fan. So there's no proper OH&S audits conducted. There's a failure in that pattern. Economic reward pressures compromising safety. So there's reports that it dates back to 1992 when they repealed the 1975 Coal Mines Act in New Zealand. Now this act was very prescriptive. It was developed from learning from disasters. There was lots of things that occurred that wouldn't have occurred back in that 1975 Act. But there was a change in government, there was change in department, and they went to the Health and Safety Employment Act, which basically gave onerous to the companies to develop safety systems, and it was very non-prescriptive compared to the 1975 Coal Mines Act. So it deregulated the industry, and they actually lost a lot of inspectors through that period, and they were very under-resourced as a regulator to enforce the regulations. They had 12 frictional ignitions leading up to this disaster. Not one of them was investigated. One failure, they were supposed to sink the shafts in the stone drivage, which had very competent strata. That was the original plan. Because they were so much under financial pressure, they decided they were going to sink the shafts right next to this high river fault to get it a bit further in by, so they didn't have to drive so much stone drivage with multiple headings. The shaft collapsed. They were told not to do it. The fault zone had crush potential all around it. They went and did it anyway, and then it collapsed. That put huge financial pressure on the company because it cost them $20 million to recover that shaft. Worker, consultant, supervisor concerns prior to incident. So it's very much a culture of what management says goes. And I believe just that incident reports I told you about is just highlights that as well. There's a high turnover of management. A lot of the management were Australian and South African, and not that that's bad, but the geology in Australia and South Africa is much different to what this mine was. Flaws in emergency procedures and resources. There's no second egress. The 1975 Act and Regulation required 2 means of egress, so that wouldn't have happened in that old legislation. There was numerous evidence of methane building up to 5% in the underground workings and no evidence of anyone withdrawing from underground leading up to the incident. So as you can see, this case study has failings in all 10 pathways, so it's a really good case study to go through, and it is not that long ago in a pretty developed country like New Zealand. Well, very well developed country. So disasters before the 70s primarily focused on mining environment character. So this is prior to 1970, so all the way back to 1800s. Primarily focused on mining environment characterised by non-mechanised manual labour and limited gas detection hazard monitoring. So through the 70s, we had Box Flat, Kayanga and Appin explosions. That all led to improved gas monitoring. In the 90s, we had Mara, South Bulli, Gretley and North Parks, which all led to the adoption of risk management and principal hazard management plans. But in Pike River in 2010 is a stark reminder of how important it is to take lessons of the past. So learnings we take back to the workplace, the 10 pathways and how they relate to our principal mining hazards. So we do spend a lot of time relating back to our principal mining hazards through this module, constantly. The importance of having effective regulation enforcement, implementing the lessons learned, what you're going to do to address these high-risk areas when you go back to your workplace. In mines rescue, we all know our emergency response requirements are quite limited, but it's where we see our importance is we're building safety leaders, and these brigades members are the people that are underground that if there is ever an incident, they're the ones that are there to provide the first aid. They know what to do. That's where we contribute a lot to the mining industry. Not only we are a small cog in assisting mine operators to get you guys to operate the mines safe. When coal service was established in 2001, we had a claims injury frequency rate of 25%. So that's 1 in 4 people putting a claim in. We've come down, trended down every single year, and we're now at 5%. So we're heading in the right direction. So it's training such as this, learning from disasters, where us as coal service can really contribute to helping you guys run your mines safe. And look, the safer we get, the easier it is to fix that these things can happen. So can you identify any pathways that present safety failure in your workplace? What can you do to address these? And do you want to learn more? So as I said earlier, we are an approved training provider to deliver this course. So you either have, you either do the resource regulator learning from disasters course, or you have to do 7 hours of formal learning from disasters training within your 5-year time period to maintain your practicing certificate. So if anyone wants to, has any questions or wants to find out a bit more about our course, please see me in the break, or yeah, happy to talk. But that's it. Thanks very much for listening.